Ethan Carter was not your typical billionaire. Sure, he had the money, more than most people could ever dream of, but his life wasn't filled with joy or happiness. He lived in a massive penthouse that overlooked the glittering lights of Manhattan. The place was beautiful, no doubt about it, but it felt empty, like a museum where everything looked perfect but lacked warmth. Ethan spent most of his days buried under piles of work, running one of the biggest companies in the city. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from investors, employees, and business partners, but rarely did he hear laughter or see smiles around him. The only person who truly mattered to him was his 6-year-old daughter, Emily. She was the light of his life, though he didn't always show it. Emily's mom had passed away shortly after she was born, leaving Ethan to raise her alone. But raising a child wasn't something Ethan knew much about. He hired nannies, enrolled her in expensive schools, and bought her whatever toys or clothes she wanted. Yet deep down he couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something missing between them. They weren't close, not the way a father and daughter should be. Every night when Ethan tucked Emily into bed, he'd try to ask her how her day went. Most times, she'd answer with short sentences before rolling over and falling asleep. Other nights she wouldn't even look at him, distracted by a book or some game on her tablet. Ethan tried to tell himself it was normal, that kids sometimes kept to themselves, but the truth gnawed at him. He saw the longing in her eyes, the way she watched other families walking hand in hand in the park. It made him wonder if he was failing as a parent. One evening, while sitting in his office surrounded by papers and glowing screens, Ethan decided to do something different. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was just a desperate attempt to fix things. Whatever it was, he picked up his phone and canceled all his meetings for the next day. Then, turning to Emily, who was coloring quietly in the corner, he said, "Hey, kiddo, what do you say we go out for dinner tomorrow? Just you and me." Emily's face lit up instantly. "Really?" she asked, dropping her crayons. "Like, outside?" Ethan chuckled softly. "Yeah, outside. No nannies, no fancy chefs, just us." She jumped up and hugged him tightly, squealing, with excitement. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was what they needed, a chance to connect, to build memories together. The next evening, Ethan dressed casually for once, trading his usual tailored suits for jeans and a simple shirt. Emily wore her favorite pink dress, twirling around in front of the mirror until Ethan told her it was time to leave. Instead of heading to one of their usual upscale restaurants, Ethan chose a small family diner tucked away in a quieter part of town. It wasn't flashy or luxurious, but it had charm. Warm yellow lights spilled onto the sidewalk, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air as they stepped inside. The hostess greeted them with a smile and led them to a cozy booth near the window. Emily climbed onto the seat, bouncing slightly as she peeked out at the bustling street. Ethan slid in across from her, glancing at the menu. He wasn't used to places like this, no white tablecloths, no sommeliers offering wine recommendations, but he liked the atmosphere. It felt real, unpretentious. As they waited for their food, Ethan did his best to keep the conversation going. "So what do you want to eat tonight?" he asked, leaning forward. "I don't know," Emily replied, swinging her legs back and forth. "Everything looks good." "That's my girl," Ethan said with a grin. "How about we start with some fries?" Emily nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling. For a moment, Ethan forgot about his worries. This was nice, simple, exactly what they both needed. But then, something unexpected happened. As Ethan reached for his glass of water, Emily suddenly gasped and pointed toward the waitstaff. "Daddy, look," she exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. Ethan turned his head, curious about what had caught her attention. A young woman was clearing dishes from a nearby table. She moved gracefully, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. There was nothing particularly striking about her appearance. She wore a plain uniform and carried herself with quiet efficiency, but something about her seemed familiar to Ethan. Before he could process it, Emily slipped out of her seat and ran straight toward the waitress. Time seemed to slow as Ethan watched his daughter throw her arms around the woman's legs and cry out, "Mommy!" The restaurant fell silent. Every eye turned toward them, including the waitress's. She froze, staring down at Emily with wide eyes. At first, confusion flickered across her face, followed quickly by shock. Tears welled up in her eyes as she knelt down to meet Emily's gaze. "Sweetheart?" the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you remember me?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? Who was this woman, and why was his daughter calling her mommy? The restaurant seemed to freeze in that moment. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversations, even the faint sizzle from the kitchen, all of it faded into the background as everyone turned their attention to the scene unfolding near Ethan's table. Emily stood there, her small arms wrapped tightly around the waitress's legs, her face glowing with pure joy. She looked up at the woman, her eyes wide and brimming with excitement, repeating the word she had just shouted, "Mommy." For a few seconds, the waitress didn't move. Her hands hovered midair, unsure whether to pull away or embrace the little girl clinging to her. Then, slowly, she knelt down until she was eye level with Emily. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she studied the child's face, her bright smile, her curious eyes, the way her tiny fingers gripped the fabric of her uniform. It was as if she was seeing a ghost from her past, someone she never thought she'd meet again. Ethan felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. Who was this woman? Why did Emily call her mommy? And why did it feel like his world was about to be turned upside down? Finally, the waitress spoke, her voice soft but trembling. "Emily?" she whispered, almost afraid to say the name out loud. "Is that really you?" Emily nodded furiously, her grin widening. Yes, I found you," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around the woman's neck now. The waitress hugged, her back holding her close as if she feared letting go. Her body shook with emotion and tears continued to fall freely. For a brief moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the room, but then reality came crashing back when Ethan cleared his throat loudly, standing up from his seat. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and filled with confusion. He approached them quickly, his tall frame towering over the pair. Part of him wanted answers immediately, while another part, a smaller, quieter part, was hesitant to break the spell between the woman and his daughter. The waitress gently detached herself from Emily and stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She looked at Ethan, her expression shifting from shock to something more guarded. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know. I didn't think—" "Didn't think what?" Ethan interrupted, his tone firm. "Who are you and why does my daughter know you?" The waitress took a deep breath, steadying herself. "My name is—" She hesitated for a second, glancing at Emily, who was still holding onto her hand tightly. "I used to take care of Emily a long time ago." Ethan frowned, his brow furrowing. "Take care of her? What are you talking about? We've had nannies before, but none of them ever called themselves mommy." His voice carried an edge of suspicion now, and he crossed his arms over his chest. The waitress bit her lip, clearly struggling to find the right words. "It's complicated," she said softly. "Can we maybe talk somewhere private? This isn't the place for this conversation." Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him to demand answers right then and there, but he could see how overwhelmed the woman was and how happy Emily looked. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Fine," he said. "We'll go outside." He reached for Emily's hand, but she resisted, refusing to let go of the waitress. "No, Daddy, please," she pleaded, looking up at him with pleading eyes. "She's my mommy. Don't make her leave." Ethan's heart clenched at those words. He hadn't expected this evening to turn into such an emotional roller coaster. Still, he couldn't ignore the question swirling in his mind. With a sigh, he relented. Okay, he said gently. "But we need to figure this out." Together, the three of them stepped outside the restaurant. The cool night air hit them as they walked to a quiet corner of the street, away from prying eyes. Ethan motioned for the waitress to sit on a nearby bench, and after a moment's hesitation, she did. Emily sat beside her, leaning against her side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan stood in front of them, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. "All right," he began, his voice low but steady. "Start talking. Who are you? And why does Emily think you're her mother?" The waitress glanced at Emily, who was gazing up at her with complete trust. Taking a deep breath, she began to explain. "My name is... well, that doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I was involved in Emily's life when she was very young, before you took custody of her." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, before I took custody? I've been her father since the day she was born." The waitress shook her head. "Not exactly," she said carefully. "You see, I was the one who raised her during her first year. After her biological mother passed away, I became her legal guardian temporarily. But," she paused, her voice cracking slightly, "things got complicated. Legal battles, financial struggles. I couldn't afford to keep fighting for her. Eventually, the courts decided she should live with you." Ethan stared at her, stunned. None of this made sense. How could he not have known about any of this? If she had been Emily's guardian, why hadn't anyone informed him? Why had no one mentioned her existence? "I tried to stay in touch," the waitress continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it was hard. Really hard. I wrote letters, made phone calls, begged for visitation rights, but nothing worked. I lost contact with her completely. Until today." Ethan sank onto the bench opposite them, his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew about Emily's early years was being challenged. He had always assumed she had been placed directly in his care after her mother's death. Now, hearing this woman's story, he realized how much he didn't know. Meanwhile, Emily remained blissfully unaware of the tension between the adults. She snuggled closer to the waitress, resting her head on her shoulder. "I missed you so much, Mommy," she murmured sleepily. The waitress hugged her tighter, tears streaming down her face once more. "I missed you too, sweetheart," she whispered. "More than you'll ever know." Ethan watched the exchange, his heart torn. On one hand, he felt betrayed, angry that he hadn't been told the full truth about Emily's past. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the bond between the two of them. It was real, undeniable, and beautiful. As the night wore on, Ethan knew this was only the beginning of a long and complicated journey. But for now, all he could do was sit there, listening to the woman who had once been a part of his daughter's life, and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The night air was chilly, but none of them seemed to notice. Ethan sat on the bench, his mind racing as he tried to process everything the waitress had just told him. His hands gripped the edge of the wooden seat tightly, knuckles white from the effort to stay calm. The woman, Emily's former guardian, sat across from him, holding Emily close. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, but she looked determined, almost defiant, as if she'd spent years preparing for this moment. Emily, oblivious to the tension between the two adults, leaned against the waitress with complete trust. She yawned softly, her eyelids growing heavy, but she refused to let go of the woman's hand. Every now and then she would glance up at her father, her expression a mix of excitement and confusion. "Daddy, isn't it great?" she asked sleepily. "We found Mommy." Ethan forced a smile, though his heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. He didn't know what to say or how to respond. This entire situation was surreal, like something out of a movie. How could he have gone so many years without knowing about this part of Emily's life? And why hadn't anyone told him? He turned his attention back to the waitress, who was watching him intently. "You said you lost custody because of legal battles and financial struggles," he began, his voice low and measured. "Can you explain that to me? Why wasn't I informed about any of this?" The waitress sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair. "It's complicated," she admitted. After Emily's biological mother passed away, there was a lot of confusion. You were named as her father, but at the time, you weren't actively involved in her life. I stepped in because someone had to take care of her. I loved her from the moment I held her in my arms. Ethan frowned. But you're not her biological relative, right? So how did you become her legal guardian? I was her foster parent, the waitress explained. At first, it was temporary. Social services placed her with me because they thought it would be best for her. I worked hard to provide a stable home for her, but fostering isn't cheap. There were bills to pay, medical expenses, daycare costs. It all added up. When your lawyers came in, pushing for full custody, I couldn't fight them. I didn't have the resources or the support system to keep up with the legal fees. Ethan's stomach churned at the thought of lawyers swooping in and taking Emily away without giving this woman a fair chance. He remembered hiring a team to handle the custody arrangements, but he had trusted them to do what was best for his daughter. Clearly, they hadn't considered the emotional toll it might have on either Emily or her foster mother. So you just gave up? Ethan asked, his tone sharper than he intended. The waitress flinched, but she met his gaze steadily. I didn't give up, she said firmly. I fought as hard as I could, but the system is rigged against people like me, people who don't have money or connections. Eventually, I had no choice but to let her go. But I never stopped loving her. Never. Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He realized how privileged he was, how easy it must have been for his team to sweep in and claim Emily without considering the consequences. For the first time, he saw the human side of the story, the pain, the sacrifice, the love that had been pushed aside in favor of paperwork and court orders. Emily stirred in the waitress's arms, breaking the tense silence. Mommy, she murmured half asleep. Don't leave me again. The waitress kissed the top of her head gently. I won't, sweetheart. Not this time. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. Despite his anger and confusion, he couldn't deny the bond between them. It was raw, genuine, and impossible to ignore. Watching Emily cling to this woman made him realize how much he had missed over the years. Sure, he had provided for her materially, given her the best education, clothes, toys, but he hadn't given her what she truly needed: love, connection, stability. Look, the waitress said after a long pause, her voice softer now. I'm not here to cause trouble or disrupt your life. I just want what's best for Emily. If that means stepping back and letting you raise her, then fine. But please, don't take her away from me again. She deserves to know where she comes from. Who loves her? Ethan nodded slowly, his anger melting into something closer to guilt. He knew she was right. Emily deserved answers, closure, and most importantly, the chance to build a relationship with the woman who had once been her whole world. We'll figure this out, Ethan said finally, surprising even himself with the sincerity in his voice. For Emily's sake, we'll make it work. The waitress smiled faintly, relief washing over her face. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I've ever wanted, for her to be happy. They sat there for a while longer, the three of them together under the dim glow of a street lamp. Cars passed by occasionally, their headlights casting fleeting shadows on the pavement. Ethan watched as Emily drifted off to sleep in the waitress's arms, her breathing slow and steady. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt strangely intimate despite the chaos of the evening. As they prepared to leave, Ethan reached for Emily, intending to carry her back to the car. But she stirred awake briefly, clutching the waitress's shirt. Stay with us, Mommy, she mumbled groggily. The waitress hesitated, glancing at Ethan. He nodded silently, understanding the unspoken request. Come on, he said. Let's get her home. Together they walked back to Ethan's car, Emily nestled comfortably in the waitress's arms. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead, difficult conversations and decisions to make. But for the first time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. And as they drove away from the restaurant, Ethan couldn't help but wonder. Maybe finding each other again wasn't just fate. It was a second chance for all of them. The drive back to Ethan's penthouse was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Emily had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the waitress's shoulder. The woman held her gently, as if afraid she might wake up and disappear again. Ethan glanced at them through the rearview mirror every few minutes, his chest tightening each time he saw how naturally they fit together. It was a picture he hadn't imagined before tonight, a bond so strong it seemed unbreakable. When they arrived at the building, Ethan parked the car and stepped out first. He opened the door for the waitress, who carefully lifted Emily into her arms. The little girl stirred slightly but didn't wake up. Together, they walked toward the elevator, the soft hum of its machinery filling the otherwise silent lobby. As they ascended to the top floor, Ethan couldn't help but feel like this was the beginning of something monumental, something that would change all their lives forever. Inside the penthouse, the contrast between the luxurious surroundings and the simplicity of the moment struck Ethan deeply. The place was immaculate, with sleek furniture, polished marble floors, and breathtaking views of the city skyline. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the sleepy child in the waitress's arms and the fragile connection they were trying to rebuild. Ethan led them to the living room, where a plush couch overlooked the glittering lights of Manhattan. "Here," he said softly, gesturing for the waitress to sit. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should make herself comfortable in such an opulent space, but eventually settled onto the couch with Emily still cradled in her lap. Ethan grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair and draped it over Emily, tucking her in snugly. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there watching Emily sleep, listening to the rhythmic sound of her breathing. Finally, the waitress broke the silence. "She's grown so much," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair away from Emily's face. "I can't believe she's 6 already." Ethan nodded, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "It feels surreal for me too," he admitted. "I've been raising her since she was a baby, but I realize now how little I really knew about her. About you." The waitress looked at him, her eyes filled with both sadness and understanding. "You did what you thought was best for her," she said quietly. "And honestly, I don't blame you for not knowing about me. The system isn't designed to keep people connected. It's designed to move kids around until someone steps up. You stepped up, and I'm grateful for that." Her words surprised Ethan. He had expected anger, resentment, even accusations, but instead she sounded forgiving. It made him feel even worse about the role he'd played in separating her from Emily. "I wish I had known," he said after a long pause. "If I had understood what was happening, maybe things could have been different." The waitress smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe not. Life doesn't always give us second chances, but here we are. And I think that means something." Ethan really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes or wearing expensive jewelry like the women he usually met. Her hands were calloused from years of hard work, and there were lines on her face that spoke of struggles he couldn't begin to imagine. Yet despite everything she had been through, she radiated strength and kindness. There was no bitterness in her voice, no trace of envy or greed. All she wanted was what was best for Emily, and that resonated deeply with Ethan. As the night wore on, they began talking more openly. The waitress shared snippets of her life during the years she had been apart from Emily. She explained how she had worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, often putting in long hours at restaurants and cafes just to survive. Despite the hardships, she never stopped thinking about Emily. She kept photos hidden in a box under her bed, cherished memories of the short time they had spent together. On birthdays and holidays, she would visit parks and playgrounds, hoping, against hope, that she might catch a glimpse of the little girl she loved. Ethan listened intently, his heart aching with every word. He realized how much courage it must have taken for her to keep going, to hold on to hope when the odds were stacked against her. For the first time, he saw her not as a stranger who had once cared for his daughter, but as a person, a mother, in every sense of the word except biology. In turn, Ethan opened up about his own struggles. He confessed how lonely he had been these past few years, how disconnected he felt from Emily despite his efforts to provide for her. He admitted that he didn't know how to be a father, that he had relied on nannies and tutors because he didn't know any better. Hearing himself say those words aloud was painful but also liberating. It was like admitting a truth he had buried deep inside for far too long. The waitress listened without judgment, nodding occasionally as if she understood exactly what he was saying. When he finished, she reached across the coffee table and placed a hand on his arm. "You're doing your best," she said gently. "That's all anyone can ask for. And now you have a chance to do even better, for both of you." Her touch was light, almost hesitant, but it carried so much meaning. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pity or sympathy, it was empathy, pure and simple. For the first time, he felt like someone truly understood him. By the time morning light began streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Ethan and the waitress had talked for hours. Exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, but they couldn't bring themselves to stop. There was still so much to say, so many questions left unanswered. Eventually, Emily stirred awake, rubbing her eyes and yawning loudly. "Good morning, sweetheart," the waitress said softly, pulling Emily onto her lap. "Did you sleep well?" Emily grinned sleepily, wrapping her arms around the woman's neck. "Mommy, we're home," she exclaimed, looking around the penthouse with wide eyes. Ethan chuckled nervously, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, kiddo, we're home," he said. Then turning to the waitress, he added, "I guess this is your home too, for now at least." The waitress blinked in surprise, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," Ethan interrupted firmly. "This is Emily's home, and if she wants you here, then you belong here. We'll figure out the rest later." Tears welled up in the waitress's eyes, and she hugged Emily tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for giving me another chance." Ethan smiled, though his heart still felt heavy with uncertainty. He knew this was just the beginning of a long journey, one filled with challenges, compromises, and difficult decisions. But for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, they could build something beautiful together. Something real. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. Ethan, the waitress, and Emily found themselves navigating uncharted territory, learning to adjust to a new dynamic that none of them had anticipated. The penthouse, once a quiet sanctuary for Ethan's solitary routines, now buzzed with life in ways he could never have imagined. Emily was overjoyed, bouncing between her father and the woman she called Mommy, with boundless energy. For her, it felt like a dream come true, a fractured family piecing itself back together. Ethan, however, faced a steep learning curve. He had spent years as the sole decision-maker in Emily's life, relying on his wealth and resources to provide everything she needed. Now he suddenly had to share not just his space but also his role as a parent. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old habits clashed with new realities, creating tension even in the simplest situations. One morning, for instance, Ethan woke up early to prepare breakfast for Emily, a rare gesture meant to show his commitment to being more involved. He whipped up pancakes shaped like hearts, sprinkled them with powdered sugar, and arranged fresh fruit around the edges of the plate. When Emily walked into the kitchen, her eyes lit up with delight. But before she could dig in, the waitress appeared, carrying a thermos of coffee and looking slightly disheveled after a late-night shift at the restaurant. "Wow, this looks amazing," she said with a smile, glancing at the elaborate spread. Then turning to Emily, she added, "But don't forget your vitamins, okay? They're on the counter." Ethan froze mid-pour, his hand hovering over Emily's glass of orange juice. Vitamins? He hadn't thought about that. In fact, he realized he didn't know much about Emily's daily routine beyond school schedules and extracurricular activities. The waitress, on the other hand, seemed to remember every detail, down to the exact time Emily liked to brush her teeth. I can handle it," Ethan stammered, feeling a pang of insecurity. Was he failing again? Did she think he was incompetent? The waitress noticed his discomfort and quickly softened her tone. "Hey, no pressure," she said gently. "We're figuring this out together, right? You do what you can, and I'll fill in the gaps." Her words eased some of the tension, but they also highlighted the challenges ahead. This wasn't just about co-parenting, it was about blending two very different worlds. Ethan's life revolved around board meetings, business, deals, and luxury. The waitress's life was rooted in hard work, sacrifice, and simplicity. Bridging that gap wouldn't be easy, but both of them were determined to try, for Emily's sake. As the days turned into weeks, they established a tentative rhythm. The waitress continued working part-time at the restaurant, refusing to rely solely on Ethan's financial support. She insisted on contributing to household expenses even though Ethan repeatedly told her it wasn't necessary. "I'm not here to freeload," she explained one evening while folding laundry. "I want to show Emily that hard work pays off no matter where you start." Ethan admired her determination, though it sometimes frustrated him. He wanted to give her everything, to ease the burden she carried, but he understood why she resisted. Her independence was a core part of who she was, and it inspired him to reflect on his own priorities. Slowly, he began making changes. Not just for Emily, but for himself too. He started spending less time at the office and more time at home, playing board games with Emily or helping her with homework. On weekends, he surprised her by taking her to the park, something she had always loved but rarely experienced with him. These small gestures brought them closer, filling the gaps left by years of distance. Meanwhile, the waitress introduced Emily to traditions from their past together, things Ethan had never known about. She taught her how to bake cookies using an old recipe passed down through generations. They planted herbs in pots on the balcony, watering them every morning while talking about their dreams for the future. Emily soaked it all in, her laughter echoing through the penthouse like music. For Ethan, watching these moments unfold was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt grateful that Emily finally had the connection she had been missing. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the guilt of knowing he hadn't provided it sooner. One night, as he sat alone on the couch after Emily went to bed, the waitress joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "You look like you have a lot on your mind," she said, handing him a cup. "Want to talk about it?" Ethan hesitated, staring into the steam rising from his mug. I keep thinking about all the time we lost," he admitted. "All the memories she missed out on because of me." The waitress nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's natural to feel that way," she said. "But dwelling on the past won't change anything. What matters is what we do moving forward. Look at how happy she is now. That's because of you and me working together." Her words struck a chord deep within him. She was right. They couldn't undo the mistakes of the past, but they could create a better future, one built on love, trust, and mutual respect. Their relationship evolved in unexpected ways. At first, Ethan viewed the waitress primarily as Emily's mother figure, someone whose presence was essential but secondary to his role as her father. Over time, however, he began to see her as more than that. She wasn't just a caregiver. She was a partner in parenting, someone who challenged him to grow and become a better version of himself. They started having deeper conversations, discussing not only Emily's needs, but also their own hopes and fears. Ethan learned about the waitress's dream of opening her own cafe someday, a place where people could gather, share stories, and feel at home. Inspired by her passion, he offered to help fund the venture, discreet, partially covering the costs, without seeking recognition. It was his way of saying thank you for everything she had done for Emily and for teaching him lessons he never knew he needed. In return, the waitress encouraged Ethan to reconnect with parts of himself he had long neglected. She urged him to take breaks from work, to explore hobbies he used to enjoy before his career consumed him. Together, they rediscovered the joy of simple pleasures, cooking meals together, watching sunsets from the balcony, and laughing over silly jokes Emily made up. Emily thrived in this new environment. With both parents actively involved in her life, she blossomed into a confident, curious child. Her teachers noticed a difference too, commenting on how engaged and enthusiastic she had become in class. At home, she acted as a bridge between Ethan and the waitress, bringing them closer with each passing day. One evening, as they sat around the dining table sharing a meal, Emily looked up at them with shining eyes. "Daddy, Mommy," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Are we a family now?" Ethan and the waitress exchanged glances, their hearts swelling with emotion. Neither of them had expected to hear those words so soon, or ever, but they knew the answer immediately. "Yes, sweetheart," Ethan replied, reaching across the table to hold the waitress's hand. "We're a family." Tears welled up in the waitress's eyes as she squeezed Ethan's hand tightly. For the first time in years, they felt whole, not just as individuals, but as a unit, a team, a family. And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter, they knew they had found something truly priceless, a second chance to build a life filled with meaning, connection, and joy. Months had passed since that fateful night at the diner, and life for Ethan, the waitress, and Emily had transformed in ways none of them could have predicted. What started as a chance encounter born out of heartbreak and confusion had blossomed into something remarkable, a family stitched together by love, sacrifice, and second chances. Each day brought new challenges, but also moments of pure joy that reminded them why they were doing this. Ethan's penthouse, once a symbol of isolation, now felt alive with warmth and laughter. The sleek furniture was still there, along with the breathtaking views of Manhattan, but the space had taken on a different character. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a sanctuary where three people who cared deeply for one another shared their lives. Emily's toys littered the floor, books were stacked haphazardly on coffee tables, and mismatched mugs filled the kitchen cabinets, evidence of a household built not on perfection, but on connection. The waitress continued working part-time at the restaurant, though her dream of opening her own cafe was closer than ever. Thanks to Ethan's quiet support, she secured a small storefront in a cozy neighborhood. On weekends, the entire family pitched in to help renovate the space, painting walls, sanding floors, and arranging furniture. Emily loved every moment of it, proudly declaring herself the official taste tester as they sampled recipes and decorated the interior. Ethan found himself enjoying these hands-on projects more than he expected. For years, his wealth had insulated him from manual labor, allowing others to handle the details while he focused on strategy and results. Now, standing shoulder to shoulder with the waitress, covered in paint and sawdust, he discovered a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. There was something grounding about creating something tangible, something real, with your own two hands. And even more so when it was done alongside people you cared about. Opening day at the Yarrow Cafe arrived sooner than anyone anticipated. The small shop buzzed with excitement as friends, neighbors, and curious passers-by streamed in to see what all the fuss was about. Strings of twinkling lights hung above wooden tables, potted plants added a touch of greenery, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of baked goods. A chalkboard sign near the counter read, "Welcome home." Ethan stood near the entrance, watching as the waitress greeted customers with her trademark warmth. She moved effortlessly between tables, refilling cups and chatting with patrons like old friends. Emily darted around excitedly, showing off the cafe to anyone who would listen. "This is my mommy's place," she announced proudly, pointing to a mural on the wall that depicted a tree surrounded by smiling faces. She painted that herself. Ethan smiled, feeling a swell of pride, not just for the cafe's success, but for the woman who had made it happen. He realized how much she had taught him about resilience, determination, and finding beauty in imperfection. These were lessons money couldn't buy, and they had changed him in profound ways. Later that evening, after closing up shop, the trio returned to the penthouse exhausted but exhilarated. They sat together on the couch, sharing slices of leftover cake and recounting the highlights of the day. Emily yawned loudly, her eyelids drooping despite her best efforts to stay awake. "Bedtime for you, kiddo," Ethan said, scooping her into his arms. "No fair," Emily protested weakly, resting her head against his shoulder. "I wanted to stay up late tonight." "You can stay up late tomorrow," the waitress promised, tucking a blanket around her. Right now, your body needs rest. As Ethan carried Emily to her room, the waitress lingered behind, tidying up the living area. When he returned, she was perched on the edge of the couch, staring out the window at the glittering city below. Her expression was thoughtful, almost wistful. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, sitting beside her. She turned to face him, her eyes soft with gratitude. "Just everything," she admitted. "How far we've come. How lucky we are to have each other. I never imagined things would turn out like this." "Neither did I," Ethan confessed. "But I'm glad they did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the city fading into the background. Eventually, the waitress spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Do you think we're doing okay? Like, really okay?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, I do. We're figuring it out step by step. And honestly, I think we're better because of each other." Her lips curved into a shy smile, and she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Me too," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me be part of her life again. Of your life." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, feeling a surge of emotion he couldn't quite put into words. "Thank you for reminding me what truly matters," he replied, "for showing me how to love bigger, live fuller, and appreciate the little things. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were still disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. Balancing work, parenting, and personal aspirations wasn't easy, especially when their backgrounds and lifestyles were so different. But they faced these challenges together, leaning on each other for strength and guidance. Over time, their bond deepened, evolving into something neither of them had expected, a partnership rooted in mutual respect, admiration, and affection. Emily thrived in this nurturing environment, growing into a bright, confident child who radiated happiness. She loved spending time with both her parents, whether it was helping her dad solve puzzles or baking cookies with her mom. She often told her friends at school about her awesome family, describing them with such enthusiasm that it warmed everyone's hearts. One afternoon, while playing in the park, Emily paused mid-swing and looked at her parents thoughtfully. "Do you know what makes us special?" she asked. "What's that, sweetheart?" The waitress replied, brushing leaves off the picnic blanket. "We're like puzzle pieces," Emily explained, holding up a stick she had been using as a pretend sword. "We fit together perfectly, even if we didn't start out that way." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head in amazement. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" "I learned it from you guys," Emily said matter-of-factly, grinning ear to ear. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. The cafe became a beloved fixture in the community, a place where people gathered to share stories, celebrate milestones, and find comfort in familiar surroundings. Ethan scaled back his demanding schedule, focusing on projects that aligned with his values and allowed him to spend more time with his family. The waitress continued pursuing her passions, inspiring those around her with her creativity and resilience. Through it all, they remained united, not by blood, but by choice. Their journey had been messy, unpredictable, and at times painful, but it had also been beautiful. They had learned that families aren't defined by biology or circumstances. They're built on love, trust, and the willingness to grow together. And as they stood side by side one crisp autumn evening, watching Emily chase fireflies in the backyard, Ethan and the waitress exchanged a knowing glance. In that moment, they understood. No amount of wealth or success could compare to the simple joy of being part of something greater than themselves. Together, they had created a home, not just a physical space, but a haven of belonging, acceptance, and unconditional love. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. Every single moment.